All right. Welcome. I am excited for this conversation today on how to make your DEI initiatives sustainable. I am Katie McLaughlin, founder and chief strategist and transformation artist at McLaughlin Method. And if you didn't already know this, this session is approved for HRCI credit. So that's just a little extra bonus for you being here or watching this. Let's see. Quick introductions. Who am I? Actually, quick disclaimer. We're talking about DEI, but I cannot speak about the experience of being a Black, Indigenous, Latinx, physically disabled, or LGBTQ individual, and I won't try to. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer out there whenever we talk about these kinds of topics. So who am I? I have over 15 years experience as a coach and facilitator. I've won 2 Horizon Awards for training that I've built. I've worked in a variety of industries, have a lot of content area expertise in learning development, performance consulting, and as you can see it below, there's a lot of articles and podcast episodes where I've been featured. And the QR code, whenever you see that in the corner, that's just a way that you can get in touch with me or learn more about what I do. My business, McLaughlin Method, I am focused on helping thriving teams to get results. So in order for teams to get results, you first have to thrive. And so I provide experiential and strategic solutions for teams, leaders, and companies. Connect with me if you want to learn more. And I'd love to chat with any of you who are attending or watching the recording afterwards. So we got a lot to cover today. So here we go. We're going to talk about DEI goals and typical actions taken to meet those goals, the qualities of sustainable DEI initiatives, talk about how culture change and behavior change are required to get to sustainability. We're going to talk about data you have that will help you identify actions and agenda items for your DEI initiatives. And we're going to rewrite some DEI goals for better impact. And if you hadn't already figured this out, throughout this, you're going to get a ton of action items. I have a huge bias for action. So I will always give you lots of action items. So things you can take away and put into practice in your organization. Goals. So first off, you can either answer in the Whova chat or there's also polls. What goals already do you have for your DEI initiatives? I'm not going to read through them live on the call, but I encourage you to take a look and compare. This is a great opportunity to get to know other folks and maybe connect with someone who has a similar goal for your DEI initiatives. And there's also a poll on why you have your DEI goals. It's really important that there's purpose behind these DEI goals, and we're going to talk today about some of that purpose to help fuel your goals and help fuel how you shape your goals. Again, feel free to answer in the chat or go ahead and answer that poll. I hate to break it to you, but there is no checklist for DEI. You may have seen many different checklists out there, and all of the things that are being recommended on a checklist are important for your organization. But one of the big challenges is that there's this over focus on macro events and macro actions that you do at a company. Your company-wide meetings, your awards and recognition, hiring processes, metrics, identity population reviews, promotion, pay equity. This is all super important, and I don't want to make that seem not important, but DEI is about more than this. And we got a lot of work to do. This is from a 2022 workplace DEI report from Culture Amp. They're one of the engagement survey providers. This is from 2,100 organizations. And organizations are, very few of them know how to measure the effectiveness. So we're going to talk about that today. Many don't have enough resources. So start thinking about it. Do you have resources and how can you get them? I was really surprised that less than half have a DEI policy or enforcement process, and that only 60% have any DEI training. I did see a couple of answers to the polls in there that some people don't have any DEI goals. And so I hope this lays a foundation for you on how to set them and how to actually have those goals make impact. So Have you ever felt like any of these images? You'll see that there's data to back up some of these images and some of these feelings. But you see I've got a little like theater mask in the corner up there. One of the highlights of the way that I provide education and training and coaching to leaders and companies is through theater. And if we look at each of these images like they are an archetype or an image of a typical experience someone might have in the workplace, my question to you is, have you ever felt like any of these? And have you ever seen someone in your company feel like one of these? If you've never felt it, I want to encourage you, what would happen if you were to like take on one of these images, right? Like I'm doing right now, and really like feel where the tension is in your body and ask yourself, have you ever felt like this anywhere? So if you have, you can start to immediately empathize with someone who's going through that experience. And if you haven't had that experience before, it's as if you've now just stepped into their shoes. So that's one of the things that we do to help build empathy and emotional intelligence skills. In case you weren't motivated enough to do DEI, besides it being a requirement, highly inclusive companies are more than likely to hit their financial target goals and exceed them. So that's a huge ROI maker for your initiatives and can help your leaders, C-suite, board to support adding this to your budget if you don't have enough resources. Some other words to keep in mind: DEI, the results of a good strategy help to boost productivity, they boost innovation, they boost motivation and engagement of your team, and boost profit. So you set goals. I have seen very similar goals to this with many different companies, increasing the number of diversity hires by 15% by the end of next quarter. And that then typically results in the actions that an HR team would take: reviewing extra resumes for underrepresented populations, aiming to have 2 or a certain number of underrepresented identities make it to the final round interviews. And you're likely looking at outreach, recruitment, sourcing tools and opportunities to try to reach some of those underrepresented populations. All of these things are, again, really good things to do. But if this is your only goal, and by meeting this goal, you mark your DEI initiatives as success, as done, you're missing the point. Here are some unintended possible consequences of having your goals only focused on identity count. You've got managers who don't understand why they're having to either choose a candidate that they don't want, or that they have to interview candidates that you're making them do. Those same managers might have an attitude toward these new employees and expect more, or expect that these underrepresented folks have to prove themselves. There may also be a skills gap from the leader and the rest of the team on how do we integrate, get accepting of different ideas and backgrounds. New hires can often feel other and excluded. There's no role models for them. And historically, and this continues, that there'll be lower tenure and higher turnover from those underrepresented groups. So just boosting your numbers isn't sustainable. It's not making that impact so that holistically your company is benefiting from having diverse individuals on your team. It is much more than just a tally of people's identities. So really keep that in mind and start to look critically at your goals. Are they only based on a tally of people's identities? Then I encourage you to start taking different action. It requires culture and behavior change for your DEI initiatives to be sustainable. I thought really hard about the language that I wanted to use in this session. And most importantly, sustainability and being sustainable is the most important quality of DEI initiatives. So here's kind of a list of qualities of sustainable DEI initiatives. And don't worry, after this presentation, I'm going to upload a PDF of this session. But for those of you who are in like the learning and development world, you know that when you write something down physically, that you boost your own retention of knowledge. You need a clear purpose. Why are you doing this? If you're doing this because your board of directors told you to, that's a problem. We need to find the deeper meaning. You need to engage leaders in the process, decisions, and plans. It's not enough for HR to do this on its own or behind closed doors, or to only do it with the executive leaders. We all know that it's not the executive leaders who are the ones that actually get the work done, if I can be completely frank. It is those everyday leaders, those managers of individual contributors. They're the ones that need to be involved. There has to be accountability. Someone has to be looking, watching, measuring, observing, and there need to be real consequences. If not, then your programs won't have any meaning. There won't be any like teeth to your programming, and it won't be sustainable. It won't have impact. I'm always surprised at how little HR teams, talent teams provide any kind, whether it's DEI or otherwise, progress updates and points or tips company-wide. If you take nothing else out of this presentation today, I want to encourage you to have your voice and the work that you're doing heard across the company. Because I know that all of you are making a difference. You're all trying and you're all working towards creating a better workplace. Let people know. You have to include processes, experiential learning, coaching. I cannot emphasize coaching enough. It is something that historically every single organization does not do enough coaching. We focus too much on managers coaching their employees and not enough on coaching leaders. So keep that in mind. We also need to do observations. If you just ask a manager, how is it going? You're going to get a biased answer. So go observe meetings. Like I said before, not just about headcount metric, and we have to develop real skills. So we're going to talk a little bit more today about skills that you can be teaching. Another big problem, 41% of all managers state that they are too busy as their reason to implement any kind of diversity and inclusion initiatives. Sound like a problem? Sound like your organization? So what do we have to do? We need to provide clear actions to take every single day. I'm curious because I realized that I have a little extra time. Some of these things didn't take me as long to go through, that I'm curious if anybody has any example actions that they can think of just based on this like first part of the presentation, any actions that you would say or things you've observed in your team. Go ahead, add that to the chat. I'd love to take a look at that, call out things that you have shared. And I'm just opening the chat right now because I realized that I didn't have it visible to myself. So we are live if anybody else wasn't sure. Cool, and I'm seeing some notes in here about people's goals and why they have them. And I love seeing language like everyone feels welcome and included to help with company and individual growth, culture of engagement, focus and intentionality. Ooh, I love it. Recruit for the future, for growth. It's the right thing to do. Absolutely. I love all these thoughts. Again, feel free to engage in the chat, add in your clear actions that you might initially think of based on the talk so far. The big thing I also want you to consider when it comes to skill development is empathy and emotional intelligence. It is not enough for your leaders to know what empathy is And it's not enough for them to know what emotional intelligence is or what it looks like. This is where people need real skill development. They need practice. I refer to it as a rehearsal for reality. As we're trying out new skills, we need support in a safe environment. So that way we are not just trying it out for the first time. Again, I use theater as part of my work and a way to help boost those empathy skills. And so I want you to take a look at these two images, and I would encourage you to think about creating them yourself. If you're joining us remotely, you're not on video, so you don't have to worry about feeling embarrassed. But if you're a leader and you approach your DEI initiatives or feel something about the DEI requirements maybe that your company is putting in place, and you approach it kind of from this perspective, right? That means that you're kind of putting up a wall. You're hesitant, resistant, trying to shrink yourself, right? That doesn't sound like somebody who's motivated or engaged or like ready to take action. Whereas a leader who's like the image on the right, with like an openness and, bright face, standing up, that looks more like somebody who is engaged, who is welcoming and willing things to happen. So that's kind of change number one that needs to be put into place. And then all of the work that we're doing and that we're going to talk about, all these skills and actions, relate to changing, if we have these images as representative of underrepresented people, and really all people. The benefit to doing inclusion right and doing DEI right is that all people at your team, regardless of their identities, start to feel like their lived experience working there is more positive, more open to them, right? So our goal is to shift people from that image on the left to the image on the right, and that feeling that they have as a result. It's important that we make it safe for everyone to be themselves, to speak up, to contradict a leader, to share an idea, to report a problem, and to ask for help. Many of you might have heard the term psychological safety. These are some of the actions and the scenarios where people might not feel safe. So these are the things to be starting to focus on. Start observing behaviors, and these are things that your leaders can also start to do. So feel free to give them this list. In, say, an average team meeting, or when you do a survey, who is speaking up? Is it kind of the same group? Is there any kind of diversity in who is speaking up? And if there are people who aren't speaking up, that's an opportunity to investigate. How can we make it feel safer for people to speak up? Now, who is at the table? This goes back to representation. So if there are not people from a diverse group of identities at the table, then that's another problem. Now, I know that a lot of these hiring practices are aiming for that, and I would encourage you to also think about other ways that you can start to practice this. Like, even before you have a more diverse workforce by identity, when you're having a cross-functional meeting or you're doing a focus group, for example, do you have people that represent different departments? Do you have people who represent different tenures? Do you have people who represent different backgrounds and different points of view? Have you thought to include customers or prospects in some of these conversations? You can start to implement these questions and these ideas, and that will continue to overflow as you bring in more diverse identities and candidates. Who is listened to is very similar to who speaks up. Do you notice folks being interrupted, and how can you start to shift that? Are there requirements or limitations in place Sometimes that has to do with promotions. Other times it has to do with how we're reviewing resumes and how we're hiring. And most importantly, what is rewarded. So I worked at a company who had what they called a lifesaver award. And once a month, it was essentially like an employee of the month award. And the lifesaver award, I've got it around here somewhere. You literally got a tiny little lifesaver, which was really cute, like the kind that you throw off a boat, for if anybody didn't know what I meant by that. And month after month, I continued to see people get rewarded because of how late they stayed, how many hours they worked, how much they took on. And that is showing a bias for those different behaviors. And it is not making room for people who can't. Some people can't because they have real life, real world things going on. And when we reward behaviors like how much someone works, that's just encouraging a culture of burnout and encouraging a culture, and especially it's encouraging a culture in the leadership that we can just continue to push and lean on our people in order to meet business goals, rather than setting more realistic business goals and evaluating if we have the resourcing to meet our business goals. So I hope that these different things start to give you items that you can be thinking about. And now that I have the chat up on my other screen here, please feel free to chime on in if you're out there. It helps me know that you are out there since I can't see anybody. But I'd love to just hear any thoughts, comments, questions as we're going along. So I encourage everyone to focus on what I call the in-between moments of culture. These speak to the actual lived, felt experience of your company. When people quit and describe like your culture as a toxic culture or having a toxic leader, these are the types of experiences and in the scenarios where they're experiencing those feelings. And I refer to it as workplace hurt. These are some of the places where people can be hurt in the workplace or be triggered or feel some kind of trauma. So these are the different scenarios and situations when your DEI initiatives need to be infused. So it's not just about, again, those big macro events and actions. Do you have any goals that are set to look at and improve and decrease biases in these processes? So I love engagement surveys. It was actually pretty late in my career in talent and learning and development that I finally got to see the engagement survey. And ever since then, I have been touting its benefits. I talk about it with all of my clients in probably every single podcast or feature article that I've ever done. Your engagement survey is one of your biggest tools to start identifying those action areas. Now, I've also got a free ebook that's going to take some of this content about engagement surveys and how to break it down into even more detail. So if you want to go further today, grab that QR code and you see that there's a button right there for the ebook. So if you don't have access to your engagement survey, start asking. If you're not doing an engagement survey, start doing one. And if you need help or recommendations on providers, please let me know. I'd be glad to offer suggestions and support there. So if you have an engagement survey, I encourage you to think about, do you have questions that are focused on a DEI impact? Now, very few of these questions that I highlighted actually use one of the DEI words. I think only one of them that I highlighted actually has diversity in it. We've got the word equitable over there. But the reason why I've included all of these things is that these are all leading indicators of the success of your DEI programs. And I would actually say so these are leading indicators of where you need to work, right? So for example, I'm going to take that top one and break it down. If you have, I think most people, if you're not familiar with an engagement survey and how they're phrased, almost all of them like this are not a question, it's a statement, and people are asked to rate that experience that they have on a scale from like super likely, happens all the time, to like never happens, strongly disagree, something like that. And so if we have this question, I'm included in decisions that affect my work. Let's say we have a 65% agree or strongly agree with this statement. You might think, woo, that's awesome. But flip it around. That means 35% of your company feels they are not included in decisions that affect their work. So 35% of people are also saying, I want to be included in decisions that affect my work. And then you can splice all of that data by department, by team, by tenure, by identity, and those will continue to reveal for you areas that need impact, areas that need intervention. So if you're noticing that there's this really big skew in a particular department, identity, tenure, that's where you can focus first. Focus on that area where there's this really big skew. But don't leave out the people who are doing it well. If you've got leaders and teams that are doing this well, encourage them to stay the course and continue to include people in decisions that affect their work. Now, there's plenty of other possible examples of questions or statements that are part of your DEI survey. Excuse me, not just your DEI survey, but your engagement survey. So I encourage you to use these as inspiration for adding them if you don't have any questions like this. And ultimately, we want to focus on building inclusionary behaviors in all areas of your business. So when I talk about inclusionary behaviors, all of these things are examples of inclusionary behaviors, and they're behaviors that leaders and individuals directly influence. So start to take an inventory within your business where decisions are being made, where recognition is given, where ideas are shared, where hiring is happening, where promotions are happening, where special projects are happening. Start to make a list, because you have to know where these things are in order to know how do you start to build an intervention, build a goal, build a plan, a process, a training, a coaching. You have to know where you're starting. All right. Before I get to that, I want to go back. Does anybody have any questions at this point about some of the things we've talked about? As you saw from the next slide, we're going to jump into how do we rewrite some of these goals in order to make them more actionable to promote sustainability based on the things that we've talked about today. So I just want to remind you to go to the Whova app, open up this session. It's probably how you joined the Zoom. If you joined the Zoom, and drop something in the chat if you've got a question. I would love to take a look. I want to thank Jim for sharing an example that they've recently shared their diversity hiring practices and challenges to the entire staff, and that the transparency was well received by all. Great job, Jim. I really hope that habit of communication continues for you, and that Jim's example is an inspiration to the rest of you. That I know it can be scary when you share something, especially if the scores aren't great, right? Or the results aren't great. We all have a propensity to kind of be drawn in when somebody admits that there's work to do and admits from a perspective that is genuine, aware, and honest. So continue to feel motivated by these types of things, and I hope you'll feel motivated to take some of these actions that we've talked about here. I'm not seeing any questions, but thank you all who've answered the poll. This is so great. So now, let's start to rewrite our DEI goals for better impact. Remember, our earlier question was related to increasing the percentage of diversity hires in a particular period of time. That's what I refer to as an identity count goal. So this goal is focused on promoting sustainable culture and behavior change. You've got your new goal on the left here. We're building a culture where diverse ideas and perspectives are encouraged and appreciated. And now here's your measurement. You want to look for increased engagement scores on specific questions, like examples we talked about before, or specific sections of your engagement survey. So look at your numbers, say you're at 50% and you want to grow to 65% over the course of a year, and then keep increasing that as you move along. And measure that by decreased attrition by underrepresented populations. Now, if you've never compared attrition metrics or tenure metrics, it's important to know that it's common when you start doing a new initiative that you're still not going to see an impact in attrition. Attrition is usually a little bit of the long game, because you're going to have employees who have gone through too much workplace hurt in order to actually make a difference. In order for any of your initiatives to make a difference, they've already decided, they've already written it off. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the attrition metrics. Don't expect immediate change. If you get it, awesome. But I just want to encourage you to not get dismayed if things start to stay the same, or maybe there's a slight uptick for a little while. Now, what actions can you take based on these measurements, these goals, okay? So these are the places you look for to identify those areas to take action. Again, engagement survey, one of your best tools. Attrition data, like I just mentioned. You might look at promotion data by identity, and you might look at like hiring rates or decline rates from new hires. You might look at metrics. You might look metrics from like a team, like performance metrics. You also might look at like observational type engagements where you're like observing conversations. Next, start to investigate. Who is coaching your leaders? Is anybody? Too commonly, people aren't coaching their leaders. Do you or does your team spend any time observing leaders and teams in action? If you let people know, or you let a leader know, hey, I'm going to drop in on your team meeting, they're going to be on their best behavior, right? I believe that HR, talent teams, learning and development professionals, you should know when teams typically have either their all hands or their quarterly meetings or even their regular team meetings. Show up, drop in, because that's going to be, first and foremost, as an HR leader, you need to be plugged into business objectives, what teams are talking about, just from a business kind of business relevancy and ROI type perspective. But this is where your DEI actions come even more into that sustainable place, is when you or your team start to take time to make those observations. Where do you challenge decisions in hiring, promotions, etc.? You get to be the voice of these programs. And so speak up. And if you aren't sure how to speak up, or you're afraid to speak up, then it's time for you to do what you need to do to make it safe for you to speak up. Do you need to have a one-on-one with someone after a conversation? Maybe you have to start there. Maybe you need to get an ally on board in one of these conversations, so that way when you bring up a challenge, you've got somebody else who's got your back. And most importantly, do your rehearsal. Rehearse for reality. Talk it out with somebody else, write it out, There's so many things that we try to do for the first time in the heat of the moment. And that's where all of our stuff starts to come up, right? That's where our fears and our own personal triggers and our insecurities all start to come up. You are in your role for a reason. You have expertise. You do bring value to your organization. This is one of the areas where I'm going to push you all to be challenging decisions, hiring, promotions, wherever it might be relevant, in order to improve the lived experience and felt experience of all people at your company. We talked about this before, what behaviors do we reward? And start to get creative, right? Maybe some behaviors we can reward include, that can include people's actually alignment to DEI work. So, leaders who are providing equal opportunity across their whole team, leaders who see the biggest jumps in engagement scores. You even might see ways to reward individual behaviors related to how well they cooperated and the thoughtfulness or research that was put into an initiative to ensure that it was effective. You also might include things like people's innovation, their creativity, right? None of those things have to relate to how many hours somebody worked, the background that somebody had, right? And these are the behaviors that I just mentioned about rewarding that you want your teams to continue to emulate, to see from your leaders, from your managers, et cetera. And I cannot emphasize this enough. You need to provide interactive and experiential training and coaching for managers to practice inclusionary skills. We focus too much on managers being the only ones who coach. And as our HR leaders, talent leaders, we have to be coaches for our managers, for our leaders. And if you don't have the skills, go get them. If you don't have the skills on your team, you don't have the resources, you're already maxed out, don't be afraid to look externally. There's folks like myself all over the country doing all kinds of interventions, and we do this every day. So don't be afraid to bring in an outside perspective. As I'm sure many of you know, sometimes people believe and invest in things from somebody outside of your company, even if they have the same ideas as you. And so I know that can be discouraging. I've seen it happen to myself when I was working internally at companies before starting my business. But a good coach, a good trainer, a good consultant from the outside is going to be your partner. And they might even find ways to weave you in so that way you become also the expert, right? After the external person leaves, you are that leave behind, and you're that resource. You're the one who helps to reinforce the practices from those other workshops. And this might feel early since we just hit August, but I know most companies are doing their budgeting anytime between September to November. So your budget season is coming, and it is never too soon to start building your plan, to start building your business case for making investments in the team, in people. And I would encourage you, as I expand on kind of this idea of a business case, you need to be aware of what your company cares about. So is it revenue? Is it profit? Is it performance? Is it productivity? Is it efficiency? And align your work to that. Remember, we talked earlier about how DEI has a direct input into productivity, innovation, motivation, and profit. So any of these initiatives become your answer and your resourcing and your oomph, right? That teeth and those examples that you can lead to, hey, here's the ROI or potential ROI if we do this right. So that is our session. I was able to get through it faster than I expected. And so I want to encourage folks to drop into the chat. What questions do you have? I'm happy to kind of go back to anything that you might want to look at again. And if you aren't sure, go back into the Whova app, and that's where you can enter in a chat question, because chat is not enabled on Zoom. Cool. Some common questions that people might have, and I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment here. I'm happy to bring back up any or other of the slides. But some questions that I find most people have really relates to getting started, right? Where do we start? And maybe you need to start with one team. You need to start with one leader. I know that we all have built alliances and we have allies throughout the organization. Start there. Those might be the teams and leaders that are the easiest places for you to drop in and do an observation. I think everybody here is in the talent organization. Go have a conversation with your leader now that you've been to this chat. And maybe you bring with you, one of these slides. I'm gonna see if I can do multitask here for a hot second and share my screen again. Maybe you bring back up these areas of action, and you talk with your leader and ask about engagement surveys, ask about that attrition data, ask about promotion data. And if you're not, I think that the promotion data piece here is likely one that you are not tracking. And so if you're already doing this, if you're already looking for, some of this work, I encourage you to use promotion data as your next place to intervene. Frequently, we just rely on business leaders to, kind of make the promotions that they want to. Many of them maybe have to make a business case about that one person. But here's where we start to uncover assumptions and biases. So some of those biases that people will have will come out in promotions. I encourage you to start thinking about creating like a promotion committee or a promotion review board, where each leader, if they want to promote somebody, needs to submit multiple candidates for that promotion. And you can even create a rubric for some of these things. Using the rubric to ask people to give data around maybe things that leader has observed that are leading that person to be to be promoted. If a leader can't articulate what behaviors are driving that promotion, you have a problem. And I use the word behaviors very intentionally because I think, as we all know, many managers are promoted from within because they were the best individual contributor. And being good at your current job doesn't mean you're going to be good at your next job. So start to look for those behaviors that are actually driving somebody towards that next level of a position. Start looking for examples of the value that people have created or given to your organization. I'm trying to think. I had another idea come to mind besides just the promotion data. In addition to the promotion data, what leads to promotions? Many times promotions are a direct result of how work is distributed and who gets opportunities to do something new, to do something challenging. So as you start to look at this, and I actually realize kind of on this next slide here that something else I need to add here is who is getting assigned special projects, who is being given opportunities to do something cross-functionally. That's a really important piece to consider here. So too often we lean too hard on our top performers, which leads to burnout, which leads to disengagement, which leads to attrition. And remember that just because somebody has a certain seat on the bus doesn't mean that they have to stay in that seat on the bus. Giving people opportunities to grow, to do something different is a crucial skill and a crucial opportunity to ensure that that is being done fairly and equitably across your entire organization. I talked only very briefly about these day-to-day actions, and so I want to bring these back up because these are typically really easy ways for you to start making a difference. And this first piece on experimenting with voting and polling and surveys, this is one of those ways that it helps everyone to be heard. So you saw how we did the poll today, and obviously you may not have an app like Whova, but you can use if you use Zoom or an equivalent product, you can use the polling feature. It is now used, it's now available to non-webinar users. So if your company doesn't, or you as your license in your company doesn't have the Zoom polling or the Zoom webinar, you now have it in just regular Zoom meeting. So the other piece about kind of experimenting with ways people can be heard is that, we often talk about like using the chat, right, in a meeting. But sometimes that can still be a really vulnerable thing for someone to feel safe in providing their perspective. So one thing you can do in Zoom or other programs, you can rename yourself. And so when you're looking for really honest feedback, have everybody go into the chat and rename themselves. Now, I did not create this. I was in another session where somebody did this, and I was like, this is one of the best, one of the best resources that I've heard of. And so they had people rename themselves to all the same thing. In that instance, we were renaming ourselves to the word honest. And then we answered the question. And so it was impossible for us to tell who had answered the question. The last thing I'll bring up here on this kind of enabling everybody to be heard item before I get to the question that's in the chat is many folks, and again, this goes beyond like identities, but it goes towards safety for all folks and actually looks kind of at more like introversion versus extroversion and confidence to be able to bring something up. Give people the agenda to the meeting ahead of time and give them an opportunity to ask questions, to react, and to engage with something. So if you use some kind of shared, shared document creation or collaboration tool, create your agenda, create your talking points in that session, in one of those services, and then ask everybody to go in and give their feedback. So I'm going to switch over to one of the questions in the chat. Jennifer says, at my company, engagement surveys were mainly completed by two main groups, the everything is great and everything is awful group. So how do we engage the middle group to better understand perceptions as a whole? So Jennifer's comment and question really speak to a couple of different things. So, one of those items, to be thinking about is your completion rate, right? That was the first kind of indicator that that Jennifer mentioned. Ooh, sorry about that. I was trying to get back to a different slide. So completion rates. I've definitely worked with companies who have like rewards or celebrate different teams for hitting 100% on their engagement surveys. So I encourage you to start thinking creatively about how do we get people to actually complete the survey in the first place. The second thing I want you to consider is how clear is it to you and everyone at your company about the anonymity of your engagement survey. I've worked with a lot of people who, direct employees, peers, etc., who don't actually believe that the survey is anonymous. And that comes from a couple places. I personally have sat in the room with HR leaders who have tried to figure out who gave feedback. And that's completely inappropriate, because that is where people don't feel safe in order to speak up and be honest. And the other piece of this is about how ingrained or secretive engagement survey data is at your company. So if you're not sharing any kind of engagement survey results, or if you're not talking about what the data tells you or how that informs actions at your company, that's part of the problem. People don't think that this survey matters, and it does, right? We've talked about it, that it really does. So when I think about this other part of your question, Jennifer, around engaging the middle group to better understand their perceptions. So that's one thing that you could do, is that you could send out a kind of post-mortem opportunity for folks who might be in the middle, and give them an opportunity to share how you could make improvement. Now, I don't know if what you're getting at here, Jennifer, is that maybe I don't actually think you mean this, but I'm gonna take this to a little bit of an extreme here for a hot second. If you have more people who are voting in kind of the neutral zone, theoretically, your engagement scores are gonna go up. But the other piece that might be embedded in your question is that maybe you have people who are blowing things out of proportion in one way or another, right? People might be afraid to be honest, and so they're just giving a super high score. And so that's where you're not getting that middle ground score. And some people might be catastrophizing some of those significant things. So in some way, if you've got a high completion rate overall, or a high completion rate by team, by identity, by tenure, then you should feel like you can trust those metrics. And if there are big divides, then there's something creating that divide. So it's not just about, what makes a difference kind of across that whole spectrum, but if you're seeing that kind of chart where it's like high on both ends and like nothing in the middle, then that means that there's a really different, almost like two-faced experience that different folks are having. So that's something to really look at. I know I've worked for leaders in the past who, that was one of my biggest challenges, is that they were completely two-faced, like with me as an individual. And so the two ends of the spectrum could also indicate favoritism, right? That's where it can start to help you notice that there's bias and that someone needs work. And lastly, about this kind of engagement survey data and how to splice it, make sure usually if you're using an engagement survey provider, they provide all these cool ways that you can filter the data. And so giving a closer look at filtering that data by those different markers I've said, and I'll say them again: tenure, identity, like their department, and like their level, are they an individual contributor, leader, manager? Use all of those opportunities to sleuth out. Now, this takes time, I understand, but use that as an opportunity to sleuth out how you can start to like pinpoint your interventions. Maybe there's a tenure issue. So then maybe it's all of your people who have been here for a long time feel very, different on the negative spectrum than your newer hires. That means that you have like either made a big difference in your onboarding and early stage employees, and your late stage employee or your people who've been there for a long time haven't received any of the benefits of the new stuff you're doing. So infuse some of that new stuff into your longer term employees, so that way they're getting the benefit of those results. The last thing I'll say on this and how to start like kind of influencing or improving your results is to look at these questions and start to use some of this language in your day-to-day, and encourage leaders to start to use it too, right? So if you're trying to help people know that workforce diversity is valued at your organization, that's the one on the far left, third bullet down, start saying that. Say it in your hiring process, say it in your reward process, say it at your team meetings, say it at your all company meetings, say it in your newsletters, right? So continue to, kind of say these different things. Ask many of these questions directly to folks, right? So many of you will have a one-on-one. So feel free to ask these different questions. I'm getting the nod that it is okay for me to wrap up. I want to thank you all for being here again. I will put back up on the slides one of my contact slides, so that way you have that information. And I really hope to connect with many of you after the fact. And this has been a really great opportunity for me, and I hope that you've enjoyed a lot. Thank you so much.